In February 2011, he came out of retirement to assume the position of Vice President Operations for Algoma's Central Corporation after Algoma purchased Upper Lakes Group's interest in the Seaway Marine Transport. He retired again in 2014, and when he accepted an appointment to the board of the Great Lakes Pilotage Authority in 2015, a federal crown corporation that oversees navigation safety on the Great Lakes, a position he currently holds. Captain Pound is also president of the board of the Mission to Seafarers Southern Ontario, and hence Judith recommended him to do this presentation today. Avid travelers, Captain Pound and his wife Monica have had the fortune to see many parts of the world, whether on ship, bus, train, car, or on foot. His trip to Egypt in 2017 was one such trip that brought all the history classes in school to life. Please give Captain Jim Pound a warm Shellback welcome.
Thank you, Diane, for the introduction. This is my actually second time, I think, maybe third time I've spoken to a group of you folks, and it's a pleasure to be here. Last time I talked about how to be a sailor. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit about how to sail on the Nile as a tourist. How many folks? Quick question: how many folks have been to Egypt? Just raise your hands. Oh my God. All right. Now, how many folks paid attention while they're in Egypt? Raise your hands. All right. Here we go. I have a cartouche on my shirt. If anyone can read it, were you paying attention on what the cartouche says? I'll be a little closer to you folks.
Well, it's the Pharaoh cartouche.
It's the cartouche, and it spells my name. It spells my name Pound. I have a T-shirt that spells James, so I can't wear them together. Anyway, so I've been to Egypt, and I've got the shirt to prove it. So that's how we're going to start today. I hope you enjoy. Why don't I just start here? The Nile. Everyone knows that the Nile is the longest river in the world. It is approximately 6,600 kilometers long. It spans over 11 countries, from Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Southern Sudan, Republic of Sudan, and of course Egypt. And Egypt only takes up 22% of the Nile. It starts in the White Nile, is really the origins, and as much as the research I've done and what I heard is they're really not 100% sure of the exact origin of the White Nile. They think it's somewhere, could be either in Burundi or Eritrea, they're not sure. The Blue Nile is the one, this will work, the Blue Nile over, it's not a river, right? Is the one that gives it the main amount of water in the silt that comes into the Nile, and it flows north. So that is what actually made Egypt. This is certainly a shot from space shows that, and this one's a bad airplane shot, but it shows the narrowness of the Nile. And this one's a little bit more. That's really what the Nile looks like in Egypt, except for when you get to the delta. And it opens up. But Egypt is really that strip of land, and the rest is all brown. So the Nile was so important to that country at the beginning. I'm going to talk a little bit. I took the tour in 2017, and this was our guide, Hashim. It was a bittersweet tour. We were waiting the night before we were going to leave. The tour was set up by a really great fellow out of New Brunswick, who we had traveled with a couple times before. And we got a phone call the night before we left. And because of bad weather that was expected the next day, we thought it was going to be talking about plane delays and stuff. And what we found out is that the fellow that had organized the trip had passed away with a heart attack that day. So the question was being asked to us, we're still willing to go, because he was sort of the coordinator of everything. And we said yes, because we knew from Jim, the fellow's name was Jim, also, from him talking to us that he was very confident that Hashim was one of the best tour guides he'd ever worked with, and he'd worked with him a number of times. Hashim is an Egyptologist. He toured the Prince of Wales and Camilla when they were in Egypt, so he was well versed. And of course, we said we'll go. So everyone met from various parts of the country. We ended up, and it was, we were all saddened, but we made the trip because of Jim. We made sure we all enjoyed ourselves. Let's get on with the trip. We'll start at where we started. Here's the first picture I took getting into Egypt. It's called the Amana House Hotel. It's in Giza. It's a fabulous hotel. One of the things about touring Egypt in 2017 was that all the troubles had been taking place. So the Brotherhood had been kicked out. There was now another different government there, and tourism was just starting to get back. So what was happening, instead of 10 million visitors a year, they were down to about 1 million. And that resulted in all these great hotels, I'll show you a couple more, being available and at a reasonable price that we could go see. And the Manna House has had different, amazing number of folks that have stayed there. Agatha Christie being one, and we stayed in a couple of Agatha Christie places. So if you've read Death of the Nile, you'll know all that. And it was also Egypt's first swimming pool. So it was built in 1869. Agatha Christie and all the others stayed there. So that was the evening. We got there at night and went to bed. We were tired. It was a long trip. So the morning we woke up and we're heading to the restaurant. I walk around the corner and that's the first thing I see. It's this pyramid. And all of a sudden, every history teacher that ever talked to me about Egypt, it came to light. So we went to breakfast, walked out of our breakfast room, and that's what we looked over. That was the hotel on the pool, and that was the Great Pyramid of Giza, technically right across the street. I'll mention right now that the security in Egypt was still pretty tight. When the bus came into this hotel, you came through a security check where they had passed the mirror underneath. They had a dog sniffing around, and it was very tight. They would not let us walk literally from the hotel up the street to walk into where the pyramids were. We had to take a bus. And it was only literally across the street. Anyway, that was a great hotel. If I have enough time at the end, if I don't ramble on, I've got a little bit of a video. They had a wedding there the second night we were there, and which took up that whole grassy area in front. And normally at night, the pyramids are dark. Well, this wedding, they had the pyramids lit up. And it was spectacular at night, and it was a huge wedding. Music all over the place. They had a drone flying around with pictures, and we wished we could have joined them. First pyramids. This is the first one in Saqqara, back in the 27th century. It was their first go-at, called the Step Pyramid, 6 sides, 6 steps. Generally identified as the world's oldest structure to be built of dressed stone. It was about 200, yeah, so that was the first pyramid in Saqqara. So when we went there, we visited the main pyramids. The second one, this was the first attempt at a smooth-sided pyramid. This is Dashar. They call it the bent pyramid now. It ended up to be 213 feet, and if they had kept the sides going up, they figured it would have been 300 or so odd feet. But they realized halfway up and that it was way too steep, so they ended up leveling it out a little bit. Couldn't do much there. Quick note: the security guard. We actually walked around the pyramid, and the security guard followed us for part of it. And finally said, you want to take a picture? So we were going to get a picture at the base of it, and he took it, and then he wanted money for it. So that was our first lesson, that nothing is free. Is that if they ask, that you think they're doing a nice thing, no, they're going to want some money for it. From looking from that pyramid over to the next one called the Red Pyramid. And it was the first successfully completed smooth-sided pyramid. It ended up around 341 feet. We ended up going there, and it had taken a while since that one has actually been allowed to be visited, because it was set in a military area. And you see a bit of the military base is still there, but they have allowed us to go. You see how busy the place is. We're the only bus. And it's unfortunate for the Egyptians, but it was very fortunate for the tourists, because you weren't in line, you didn't wait for anything, anywhere. You got to go inside. You see a couple holes there on the left side of the thing where we actually, you could go into two pyramids. This was one of them, and the other one was the Great Pyramid. So we went into this one, and there was kind of bad pictures. It was tough to really take in there, just pictures of the inside, and the one on the right is actually the burial spot itself, because where the pharaoh was buried. Okay. So then we ended up over at the Great Pyramids of Giza, and they were built between 25th century or 2500 AD or BC, sorry. The big pyramid, the Great Pyramid, is the one on the far left. If you're interested, you did your book draw. There's a great book out there called the Giza Prophecy. I won't say it's a great book. It's one of those books that gives you an alternate view of why the pyramids were built. And I would, if you're interested in that sort of thing, and it talks about, if you're a mathematician, you'll love it, because it talks about angles and the different angles and how it was. And if you look from down the top, it kind of represents the pyramids of Giza, a bit of the constellation Orion. So it's an interesting book, and if you want something, I was reading it while I was there, so it kind of brought it all home. The Great Pyramid. So we finally got there, and again, if you look, the number of people we had were not many at all. And again, there's a small little gap in the pyramid, somewhere there, just on the left, lower left, and that's where we're going to be able to, we get to enter on that. Unfortunately, they're very strict there, where no pictures were allowed whatsoever. Again, just a picture of the pyramid. Looking up where the entrance is, a few folks there. One of the things about entering there, you're humped over, you've got about that high to go, and it's wooden steps, and it goes down, and it's hot as heck in there. Of course, we're there in March, but it's still very warm. And so by the time you get out, you're drenched and hunched over, but an amazing journey into to see the burial chamber itself. That's just one of my arty shots that I thought a camel on a pyramid kind of looked cool. So. And then you walk down the hill a bit, and you end up seeing the Sphinx. And it was originally cut from bedrock, all one, in the original shape, and it's since been renewed with brick. It measures 240 feet long from the paw to the tail. It's about 60 feet high, and the head measures about 62 feet wide at the rear, or it's about 62 feet wide. It's the oldest known monument structure in Egypt, and is commonly believed to have been built by the ancient Egyptians of Old Kingdom during the reign of Pharaoh Capri. And Capri was actually the son of Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid. An amazing place. If you ever get a chance, or a lot of you have been a chance and you've seen it, it brought history back into mind about how long ago these things were. Another just picture of the Sphinx that you could walk around. So enough about a little bit about water now, since we talked about we're going to be on the Nile. Here's a young sailor against a very old boat. And this was called Khufu Ship. It's called the solar ship. It's 60 meters long and 5 meters wide, and it was built around the time of the pyramids. And there's a number of these ships have been found, and they were buried in pits. This one was found very close to the Great Pyramid, and it's the reconstruction of it is amazing. And it's an intact, full size, and it was in a pit close to the Great Pyramid, and it's the world's oldest intact ship. A masterpiece of woodcraft. It's amazing. A picture of how they put this ship together. with wood and rope and that sort of thing. And what it was used for, the measurement's 140 feet long and about 19 feet wide, so it wasn't a small ship. But they think that the ship was built for the pharaohs to take them on their trip to the underworld. And one of the books which talks about the underworld says that it travels through the 12 dimensions or the divisions of the journey, which represent the 12 hours of night. They say that if this ship was plunked in water today, it would float and sail away. So it was that good, that well preserved. We finished in the area of, we were in Cairo for a while, but I'm not going to, and we came back to Cairo, but I'm not going to show that many pictures of Cairo. There were some interesting places to see, and I'll show you a few pictures from the museum, certainly on Tut's stuff. In the museum, you could spend 2 hours talking about the museum and all the different kingdoms and the different statues there. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to talk a little more about the trip on the Nile itself. And after we finished the pyramids and stuff, we hopped on a plane and we headed south. This is the first sort of our look at the Nile. This is the Nile running through Cairo. But then we headed down, and if I can get that area, I don't know if you can see that, Luxor, way down south. Valley of the Kings, you can see that. You'll see a few pictures there too. So the trip on the Nile itself, where they have all the cruise boats, runs from Luxor down to Aswan. And it takes about, well, we took about 3.5 days, 4 days, 4 nights on the boat itself. And then actually we also continued south of the Aswan, and I'll show you a couple pictures in a place called Sidi Ifni. No, sorry, not Sidi Ifni, Abu Simbel. I was going over to Morocco there for a minute. So we fly down to Luxor, and as we get there, before we even get to the hotel, they take us to the Luxor Temple. You're going to see a lot of temples here. That's what Egypt is known for, and they're all spectacular. We got there in a bit of a sandstorm. You see the red on the left picture there, and it really was a sandy, there was sand in the air. You could taste it, you could feel it, but it made us walking into this temple just an incredible experience. Let me get my notes here. So this is on the east bank of the river, and in Luxor, and it was constructed approximately 1400 BC. It's in the Egyptian language, it's called the Southern Sanctuary. It was dedicated to the cult of royal Ka, Amun, and Mut, and it was built during the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom it was Old Kingdom, New Kingdom, Middle Kingdoms, and the Ptolemies is how it goes. It's dedicated to the rejuvenation of kingship. Let me just make sure I got some of the pictures there also. Go back. And most of the kings of Egypt were crowned in reality or conceptually at this temple. Even Alexander the Great claimed this is where he was crowned. But historians are saying that's a lie. Someone else south of here does that. And he was actually done that in south of Cairo in a place called Memphis. So it's one of the best preserved of the ancient monuments, with large amounts of the structure intact. One of the things about Egypt and all of the monuments and temples is because they were built long ago, and Egypt is dirt on both sides of the Nile. There's a lot of sand going around, so a lot of these places ended up covered in sand. And it took, they're just recently found, they left in disuse, and they're slowly digging them out. Some of the pictures you can see of the old sand-covered temples is quite amazing. This one's dedicated, as I said, to Amun, who is the king of the gods. The temple was begun by Amenhotep III in 1300 and added to all the way up to Ramses II in the later 12s. There were 2 granite obelisks at the front of this. Originally stood in the front of the first, they call it the pylon, which is the entrance. But only one remains, and it's about 75 feet high. The other was removed to Paris and now stands in the center of the Place du Concours. This is the street that in front of the temple, and this avenue is a straight line from here. You walk down that straight line, you'll end up from the Luxor Temple to the Temple of Karnak, which we'll see in a few minutes. And this line with sphinxes with human heads on it. And that's just the Colossus statues of Ramses II. As it shows there, two of them are seated at the entrance. One to the east is known as the ruler of the two tombs. They did have pedicures back there. This is a toenail of the statue. And it was just the detail of all of this stuff. One of the obelisks, and just again the carving and stuff. You got to remember the temples. They say were not built with slaves. These were actually people who got paid to build these. There were some slaves involved, but the majority of the people building these temples were well-paid workers and well-paid artisans. And by just looking at some of the reliefs you see in all of the temples, it's an amazing vision. A little bit, I say we arrived in the evening, so we got a little bit of a light in some of the different statues. If you notice these statues here, it's a little hard to tell, but you'll notice that compared to, just if you can see the ones at the beginning, I'll get later to it. You'll see these fellows here all have a step forward. Their feet aren't together. There's actually, it looks like they're stepping forward. That indicated to the people that this was a statue made of a pharaoh that was living. If the feet were together, the pharaoh was dead or had been dead. And this is just called the Hippostyle Hall within the temple. And it contained the 4 columns of 8 rows each. And only the pharaoh and the priest could have entered this area in the temple. That's where we stayed, the Winter Palace. Great spot. A beautiful old hotel built in 1905. And it was really host to a lot of the media and the visitors in 1922 when Carter founded or discovered Tut's tomb. Just a little picture of the inside of it, and the grounds in the back. So we're going to start to cruise the Nile. We finally get to the point where we get on board our ship. We spend a night here in Luxor, but we get to go to the ship, and it's called the Sonesta St. George. It was built in 2011. 240 feet by 47, about 57 cabins worth. This is a picture of, again, I talk about the reduction in the tourists. There's about 18 different riverboats all laid up there. In other words, not moving, just because of the lack of tourism. They've all been laid up and have been laid up for quite a while. They were telling us about 25% of the tour boats were now running at the time we were there. It's picking up now that I've heard. And this is our boat, the Sonesta St. George, quite an ornate. The entrance hall to it. And the bedroom. Lovely spot. And the top deck. So they had the hot tub and the pool and all of that. Spent a lot of time up there, obviously. This was one of the captains. They had 2 captains on it. This was actually a couple days after we had gotten on the ship, and I'd finally talked one of the fellows into giving us a tour, because I was certainly interested in how they did that. And I had a bunch of pictures of the engine room, but I'm a deck guy, so you don't want to see engine room stuff. And so this is one of the captains, and this is how he drove the boat. 2 fingers. That was it. He was just incredible. That's all he do. He just moved these little thrusters around, and you'll see on the far right there's a white square. That's his radar. It's covered up. They don't use that. They don't. All the only controls he really had were the engine controls and the intercom there. The rest was local knowledge. They knew how to navigate up the rivers, all the different shoals and that sort of thing. It was really interesting. That's just to prove that I was there. And what was interesting, he had an interpreter do the tour for us. And he was talking to us, and so I was asking a question of the captain, and the captain was talking to the interpreter, and the interpreter was kind of frowning his brow and trying to figure out how to say it back. And I kind of understood what the captain was saying. So he's speaking Egyptian, I'm speaking English. We ended up talking together and understanding each other more about what was going on as opposed to the interpreter. It was really an interesting couple minutes when we were chatting that we actually connected, and we both laughed, shook hands, and I slept well at night knowing he was running the boat. So we get off the boat the next day. This is the colossi of Manna, and also part of the Temple of Amana House. It was built in the first half of the 14th century. Unfortunately, around 1200 BC, it was hit by an earthquake, which destroyed most of the temple. And a little bit later in the presentation here, I'll show you these colossi from a little different angle. Anyway, the temple was there, and this is just sort of a picture of how big they are. There's a guy up there in the white, he's doing some repairs or working on fixing it up. And so it's the colossi is absolutely. We're working our way towards here to the Valley of the Kings, where all the things. Oh, yeah, I forgot about this. I love the name. They really picked our group out really quick. El Rehab. You know, the one thing we did in Egypt, and there was a group of folks that liked a glass of wine now and then, and it's a Muslim country, so it's not as easy to go get it. So there was a bunch of us, we'd go scouting every time we got someplace so we can get a glass of wine to take to our room and stuff. And we looked at this bus and we just broke out laughing because we needed a rehab. This is one of the towns heading towards the Valley of the Kings, and it's populated today, but it's you'll see the little places in the side. It's also a burial place of some of the workers that worked on the Valley of the Kings. Now we're at the mortuary of the Temple of Hatshepsut. Hot chicken soup is how we got to remember her name by, and it's just close to the Valley of the Kings. That's looking at it from the front. Now Hatshepsut, there's a long, complicated story about her. She was the daughter of Thutmose the First. She ended up marrying Thutmose II, who was Thutmose's first son, but it was her anyway, it's one of those Egyptian things. It wasn't her direct brother, it was a brother by another mother, and they got married, and they had a kid, but he had another kid, and his kid became the pharaoh when Thutmose the First died, and she became the regent. And she was one of the most famous Egyptian pharaohs ever. What she did as a woman, and she was always depicted as a man, and in most of the reliefs and stuff, what they could find. She was a warrior. She was a military person. She was a trader. She believed in trade with other peoples. And she ruled for around 20 years and did an amazing job of bringing Egypt with the trade and the controlling affairs. And so she was one of the most successful pharaohs in Egypt. The interesting thing, just show you a little closer here, some of the reliefs again, original colors, but you will see in some of these, you won't see those, sorry. What happened when her son, or Thutmose III, finally came to power, is that he started to destroy everything that she had done. All of her reliefs were defaced. All of records were changed from what Hatshepsut had done to what Thutmose III had done. So until recently, and when I say recently, around 1822, they thought that she was nothing. They didn't really have a good record of her. And then, anyone know what around 1822 what that was all about?
Rosetta Stone?
Exactly. Is that they started the Rosetta Stone? Is that they started to they could translate some of the hieroglyphics and stuff, and so all of a sudden her story started to be told. So she was one of the great ladies. There's a great PBS show a lady has about the women of Egypt, and she's always on one of the top. It was an amazing mausoleum. We ended up coming around, and this is really the only picture, and I got this off the web because we weren't allowed to take pictures in the true Valley of the Kings at the time we were there. They would not let us. But this is Tut's tomb, and the thing about Tut's tomb, of course, is that it was one of the only tombs. There's 62 tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And it was developed because of the kings feared, for their safety and the riches when they were buried, and so they were concealing their tombs in this valley. They were sunk deep into the mountain. The pharaohs were interned, and there were also a few queens that are in here too, and numerous sons of Ramses II. Basically, most of the tombs were a corridor descending, and there was a few shafts around, supposedly to baffle the robbers, and then it was a pillared chambers or vestibules, and then at the far end was the burial chamber with the sarcophagus and where the mummy was laid, and all of the storage chambers around where the equipment was. So this is the only one that was, Tut's was the only one that was untouched, and the reason it was untouched is on top of Tut's tomb was the tombs of Ramses IV and V. So when the grave robbers came in, they went into the top of the tomb, or Ramses' tomb, and thought they had gotten everything. And it wasn't until Howard Carter came around in 1922 and was looking through that, he found a new entranceway to Tut's tomb. And you couldn't get in, so you walk into the place, and it's just, the feeling of going into that is just it's almost a scary feeling as you go down and you see this, where that. And this is a picture of what they found. It's called the Wall of Knowledge, and it's as it was found in Tut's tomb. All of this stuff, and it's just amazing the number of things they found. Of course, they've got them all out, and this is from the museum in Cairo. Those chairs and stuff, all gold gilded, that they had, and that Tut was using at the time. And he was just a young guy too, when he does this incredible stuff. Of course, the one thing that everyone knows about Tut is that mask. And again, once you got into that room, no photographs, nothing whatsoever. You weren't allowed, and all of his gold and stuff, you were not allowed to photograph. How's that for a bed? And I love his headrest. That's his pillow right there, right in the middle. That's where he put his head on. Another just relaxing chaise lounge for you with multi-millions. And it's a little tough to see. It's really all the sarcophagi. So he was buried in 3 different sarcophagi. These are concrete or wood stone containers that contained one inside the other, and then his tomb or his casket was inside the very middle of them all. And we'd actually seen this after we had been to the tomb, and just to know that how they had put that into the tomb and worked it down, there wasn't a lot of spacing around. So now we get out of the Valley of the Kings, and we come back into Luxor, and we come down to the Karnak Temple, or the Karnak Complex. And it's really the second most visited site in Egypt, and only the pyramids are more visited. The key difference between Karnak and most of the other temple sites is the length of time over which Karnak was developed. Construction of the temple started in the Middle Kingdom around 2000 BC and continued all the way to around 3080. 30 pharaohs approximately contributed to the buildings, and enabling it to reach the size and the complexity that wasn't really seen anywhere else. There's another picture of one of those pharaohs that was actually stepping, so you can see that he was stepping out and still around. And there's one with his feet together and not moving. One thing interesting on this, you'll see that's a pharaoh, and there's a lady represented in front. This becomes kind of significant later on when we talk about Ramses II and his favorite wife, Nefertari. And again, the columns were, again, the reliefs and stuff that are still around today are absolutely spectacular.
Are these outdoors?
Yes, yeah. It's all outdoor, open air. All the roofs and stuff have long gone away. Hatshepsut had monuments constructed. She had twin obelisks that were built here. One still stands, and the other one it's the tallest surviving obelisk in Egypt, and the other one has broken in two and collapsed. And this is a picture of just a picture of the pillars themselves.
Do you know if they're built without mortar, the way the columns are built?
For the most part, you don't see any mortar at all. It's all built on just solid stone. So there's one of that's the obelisk that Hatshepsut built, and one that's not there anymore. That's the one that fell. There's other obelisks in the area, but those were the two main ones that she had built. So we talk about commerce and stuff. Well, this is actually a representation of a market. These are on stone. They're keeping track of what was brought into the temple, what was taken out, and they kept track of it on stone. And so all of those markings have a meaning of, some sort of product in, something gone out. Again, a couple obelisks. This is a statue of, I'm pronouncing it Capri. Ancient Egyptians believed that going around the statue 3 times brought good luck. Going around it 7 times brings marriage for those who did not marry, and going around it 9 times causes pregnancy for an infertile wife. We had, almost everyone walked around 3 times. We had a couple ladies do the 7-time trip. We didn't have anyone hitting the 9. So it was... So
the men didn't have to walk around all day?
No. Not the group that I was with in any case. So I'm going to take a little trip and look at the Nile from 300 meters in the air. In the early morning, we got a balloon ride, and we got to get up early to catch the morning sun rising over the Nile. So here we are catching the balloon, getting ready for us. That's our pilot hitting it up, and there's the sunrise over the Nile. You see a little strip of the Nile there. That's it. I had a video of a 360. Remember I talked about the colossi? Okay, this is a different view of the colossi. So now we've floated over, and the pilot has brought us down to the level of their heads. And so I got the picture there, and off we floated again. Just looking at, green and very productive land and beautiful land and great products or great farming available because of the Nile. But you see the very demarcation there, that road is green on inside and it's brown going elsewhere. And you also see there the mausoleum of Hatshepsut right in the far, way off in the distance. And again, that really demarcation of what the Nile shows. And of course, you got to land. We did land and we stayed upright. It was a very calm, quiet day, but amazing little balloon ride. So finally, we get cruising on the Nile, and we are not alone. There were other boats up and around. And just not a great picture, but a few things about the Nile is this, just some pictures alongside. That's actually a water buffalo. And there was the tender for the water buffalo, this little hut that he lived in, or stayed in. A couple fellows along the route just giving us a wave as we went by. A couple ladies doing their wash. I keep telling my wife as she goes to the washing machine and complains about doing wash. I said, "Yep, that's a tough rock you would use on." And of course the ibis, which is the major bird. So we're cruising along, and this is Hashim. This is Hashim's wife, Marla. She was going to school in Cairo and met Hashim, and they married, and they're since relocated back into Prince Edward Island. But so we're cruising along. We're up on the deck on the top there, going along, and a lot of you folks, I'm sure, have done a river cruise, so you know what's coming. Is that you don't have a lot of clearance in here. So Marla and I were talking. I said, "Gee, Marla, I think you may want to duck a little bit." So she did, and we made it underneath the bridge with a few feet thing. But the boys in the back of the boat were having a good time. They were going to touch the bridge as we went by. So of course, like on all of the other river boats, they had that back thing where you'd lower it down and go along. So now we're getting into where the heck am I? Continue down the Nile. Well, this is the temple of Sobek, and in a town called this is the temple of Edfu, and it's located on the west bank of the Nile. Obviously, a town called Edfu. It was a temple built in the Ptolemies, and it was dedicated to the god Horus, who was identified as Apollo by the Greeks, sort of the equivalent of Apollo. Another, again, a beautiful edifice. That is Horus, his statue. The columns and the reliefs on all of these temples were something to behold. This is the town of Edfu, just the local folks walking around. And this was the guy that took us to, we got off the boat, we hopped into this carriage, took us up to the temple, and brought us on back. So we ended up sailing down a little farther, got into a nighttime, an evening, and we ended up in a town called Kumumbo. And this was the temple of Sobek and Horus. I pronounced it wrong, I'm sure. And again, it was constructed again by the Ptolemies. And again, an amazing little spot. And this is showing the stone screen depicting a falcon-headed Horus and an ibis-headed foe pouring consecration water over Ptolemy VII. And again, it's just the detail work on all of the temples is outstanding. There's also a place called the Crocodile Museum, and one of those places they wouldn't let you take photos again. And they actually had a mummified crocodile, because the crocodile has a great history, obviously, on the Nile. And so they had all a bunch of different crocodile caskets, crocodile tombs, and they had a couple mummified crocodiles. So as we go along the river on the east bank, these are called the Cecelia Quarries, and they work mainly under the New Kingdom in the reign of Ramses II, where over 3,000 workers were employed here pouring in stone for the Ramsey Museum, which we'll see a little bit later, and a lot farther south down the river. And just a couple more pictures of the river. They were building bridges, and you got a barge in front. One of the things on the one day, some of the sort of the feluccas, passenger boats that were on the river, and we sailed on a smaller version of those in a little while. And we get to this thing called the baseball market. So this guy told us about it. He said, you'll love it. It's the baseball market. So it's bargaining with a curve. So you'll notice on the side here, here's this boat that we passed going the other way. You notice this boat hooked onto them. So these little guys would sit in the middle of the river, and they're not motorized, they're by oar, so they would row so they could get close enough to you, and they would hook a line onto anything that was sticking out. So if you had we had rubber bumpers and different appendages that were out, and they would hang on, hook on, and off they would go. They were tagged to you, and they would yell up, and they had their wares in their little boat, and you see them being pulled along, and keep looking. They would display their wares on what they had, and you would look down at them like this, and what they would do is they would bundle up whatever they were trying to sell, throw it in a plastic bag, and they would throw it up to the top of the boat, and you'd catch it. And you'd open it up and you'd look at it and go, no, I don't like that. So you'd wrap it back up and you'd throw it back down to them. So they'd throw something else at them. And you'd open up, yeah, I like that. And you'd yell down at them, you know, however much money, and you'd bargain. And, you know, so they'd throw something else up. So you'd bargain for 2. And you finally got the bargaining going up. So you'd keep it, you'd put the money in a little plastic bag, and you'd throw it back down to them. And it was amazing. People, you know, money didn't get lost. Everything came back and forth. And it was a great, you know, this went on for an hour and a half. And as we were going along, we're coming to a set of locks in the river. And we're saying, well, these guys got to go. You know, we're going into the locks. We're done bargaining. People about stuff. No. They followed us right into the very end of the lock. And they were fighting for their last dollar right to the end. They were throwing stuff at us right when we were in the lock. Luckily, we stopped right there, so they had room to play around with. And that was just another boat behind us. So two of our boats, our ships, could walk through. Just a town as we're going down through the Nile. One of the things about you know, Egypt and the Nile is that it is an industrial area. And one day, the days that a couple of these pictures were taken, it was a lot of sugar cane being processed, so that a lot of it was being burnt, and it was a real, you know, smoky type day out. And you know, when we got up in the morning, we're looking out, we're wondering what was going on, and then we started a little farther down the river. This is what we saw. And again, it was industry, as in everywhere. Yeah, and I'm sure they don't have much pollution control there, but it's what it is.
What did it smell like?
It was just smoke, you know, just you know, the burning fields. If you've ever smelt the sugar cane. So we're coming down to the end of our cruise, and the cruise ends at the Nile, which is in Aswan, and this is the Old Cataract Hotel. So the Old Cataract Hotel was built in 1899 by Thomas Cook. Everyone knows who Thomas Cook was. To house European travelers. Its guests have included the Tsar Nicholas, Winston Churchill, Howard Carter, Margaret Thatcher, and of course Agatha Christie, who set portions of her novel, Death on the Nile, in this hotel. It's a beautiful spot. Lovely inside. That's what our rooms look like. It had a sitting room, television on this side, huge bathroom, and that's what we looked out on. That was our view. And on the way back in the hill there, you see this little bump on the hill. That's actually the mausoleum of the Aga Khan, which used to be able to. This is the elephant. It's called Elephantine Island, and it's a Nubian village on that island. And then again, the Aga Khan mausoleum way back there used to be open to the tourists, but the present wife of the Aga Khan has closed it down. And the feluccas on the river, and we do take a felucca ride, so we're going to get on board one and start cruising around. So as we go past, again, the little picture of the mausoleum, and the looks like a great heron almost in front, or some sort of thing. And our ride was waiting for us.
Oh boy.
Yep, you got it. We got a camel. And this guy was really happy that I was on board. You can see in his expression there, he was having a good time. So we got to do a camel ride across right next to the Nile. And there's Lawrence and his other fellow with him. One of the things that happened, I didn't see this, but I was one of the front camels. One of our ladies, the camel decided he was thirsty. So and you see it's a bit of a dip down to the river. Well, the camel decided he wanted to go have a drink. So all of a sudden he leaps over the side of the hill and he's heading down here. And you notice we don't have a handler in front of it. They've actually given us the reins to this thing. And luckily her handler was fairly close. But as she got halfway down towards the Nile, she's hanging on for dear life, and the handler gets her and brings her back up. But it was great discussion after that. And she will never go on another camel again. We ended up at a little Nubian village with some wares that they were selling. Very colorful stuff, and not the tourist in front, but the wares in behind. That was the lady that was on the camel. I forgot that. Yeah.
See the fear in your face.
So we were coming back, and we saw these couple of kids on a boat or a board, and wonder, what the heck are they doing? This is in the middle of the afternoon, they should be at school or something. And so they were paddling like heck to catch up to us, and we were just sailing away. And so they grab onto the side, and I said, well, what the heck do they want? Well, they start singing. They start singing in English, and I think "Row, Row, Row Your Boat" was one of them. And I can't remember the other tune, but they were singing for money. And so they dragged along with us for quite a while, singing. I think they had 3 songs, and they would keep singing them back and forth, and we'd give them a few pennies. We ended up at the Aswan Dam. This is, of course, where we ended the cruise, and we looked at the Aswan. That's just built in. Let me have a look here. Yeah, so it was built in the 60s. Aswan Dam with Russian help. It was built by the Russians, helped up, and they had made a big monument there. So inside, it was filled full of kids that day, but it was inside, and it has all the Russian sayings and the Egyptian sayings, and Nasser, who was the Egyptian president at the time. I can't remember I think it might have been Khrushchev at the time. In the 60s it was built. And it was well protected. And I'll talk a little bit about protection right near the end here, about how we were protected when we were in Egypt. So this is called the Philae Temple, dedicated to Isis, built in the 4th century. And what happened here, again, all of these temples are beautiful spots, but this one was underwater. After they built the dam, it was underwater. And this is one of the temples they moved to another island. And literally brick by brick, block by block, they moved this whole place to the other island. And one of the things that is important, or the main item on this, is called Trajan's Kiosk. And it's a heptahedral temple, which means it doesn't have a roof, located at the reservoir. And it's one of the largest ancient Egyptian monuments standing today as a complete thing. And it was attributed to the Roman Emperor Trajan. So we went through that. We're down in Aswan, and now we head south. I was talking to someone before. We originally were going to go to an oasis out in the desert, but about a year before, the Egyptian army managed to kill 4 or 5 tourists in that oasis, and it still hadn't opened up for tourism. And we were quite happy not to go there. And so as a difference, we went down south of Aswan, about 240 kilometers, and we're about 20 to 25 miles just above the Sudan border, to a place called Abu Simbel. And the reason we go to Abu Simbel is the temples that are there. And the temples are to Ramses II and to his wife of 20, 30 years of Nefertari, not Nefertiti, Nefertari. And this is, as you walk in, you'll see the sort of the temple that you kind of see on the first right is Nefertari's, and then you've got Ramses II. This is the Nile, looking from the temple, looking out. And what the issue was here is, well, first of all, is that the water came in and it was flooding the temple. And so what they did is they decided to move it. And they literally did it block by block, and they raised it 64 meters, and they moved it back from the riverfront 200 meters. And they did this in the late 64 to 68 is when they were doing this, when obviously the water was flooding in there. And it was, they would only allow Italian stonemasons to do the work. And if you go inside, and we did get to, obviously we went inside, it was beautiful work. You talked about there's no mortar at all. They just did some fantastic work. You wouldn't believe the place had been cut apart and moved in 30-ton blocks. The other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of that's the front of the Ramses Temple, and you'll see. You can probably see a couple of little people.
So was that whole thing there?
Everything, yeah, that whole. I don't know if I took a picture of the back end of it for you. No, I didn't. In the back end. It's actually a big mound of dirt, and so what they did is they moved the temple itself. The structure was cut into the rock down below, and so they just literally cut it out of the rock and moved it up, and then they covered it over with sand or with dirt. So they literally moved that whole thing. all that's inside of it. An amazing job of doing that. So when they found that temple, and it had been sort of lost, you know, it took 20 years to build back in 1264, and it wasn't rediscovered, you know, as sand and stuff fills in, and it wasn't rediscovered until 1813. And it had been left unattended and filled, 3/4 filled with sand. And what we found when you walked in there is the columns, these huge columns up there, there's graffiti, you know, 30 feet up. And it's because, you know, explorers and the, you know, whoever had come in on the sand and wrote their name. And so it was like, you know, Frank was here in, you know, 1862 sort of thing. It was, you know, it was sad, but it was kind of cool to see that. They had seen that. So a lot of these temples had been sanded over, and they literally had to dig them out of the sand. So that was Ramses. You're not supposed to take photos in Ramses Temple, but there's no one around, so I snapped a couple quick ones of one of the chambers, just what was in there. So again, the reliefs, and they all had significance, and I did pay attention when I was there, but I've forgotten. I talked about the significance a little while ago of going in and the size of the little lady in front of the statue. This was Nefertari's. She was so well thought of that they allowed her statue to be the same size as Ramses II. And that's the only instance in Egypt that they can find that. That's how well she was thought of. And that's just sort of a size of my wife in front of Nefertari. And we went, they had a night show, a light show, sound show at night. And we went to that, and that just lit up that beautiful exhibit. So that was the end of our sort of river trip, and we headed back up to Cairo. Talked about that. That's back in the museum. That's the Rosetta Stone, a copy of the Rosetta Stone. The original is up in England. We talked about Nefertari. There's a bust of Nefertiti. And just a couple things back on just what Cairo looks like. Now we made a quick trip up to Alexandria to have a look. A couple things we looked at. One was the Commonwealth gravesite for the Battle of El Alamein. I didn't take any pictures of that. I want to leave those folks sleeping well. But it was just a very interesting place to stop and see and take a few moments to understand what was going on and looking at all the young people underneath. One of the 7 wonders of the world that used to be there. Anyone? The Lighthouse of Alexandria. Library was destroyed. They figured by, I think it was Antony or Julius Caesar, when he came to visit Cleopatra one time, they started a fire in the harbor, and the fire extended over to the library, and hence that's why it was the story I was told there. But speaking of library, we went to the new one, a little different than the old one. But they had this really cool thing. It's called the espresso book machine. So is that, you know, a book to keep you awake or what? And all it was a bunch of copy machines. So couldn't figure that one out. Oh, this is the church of Sergis and Bacchus Church. And it was traditionally believed to have been built on the spot where the Holy Family, Joseph, Mary, and the infant Jesus rested on their journey, at the end of their journey into Egypt. And it was while Joseph was supposedly working on the fortress. So we got to go through that, which was nice. This is the best photo I got, but it's also one of the wonders of the medieval world, and that's the catacombs. It's an necropolis, consists of a series of Alexandrian tombs, statues, and archaeological objects of the pharaonic funeral cult with Hellenistic and early imperial Roman influences. So you go down the spiral staircase, and you come into these different caverns where all of the different folks were buried. So then just to kind of finish off, I think I'm just about on time, I hope. Just some things you saw on the street, and these are the vendors. So you want a clothespin? There you go, ladies. Pick your color, get your size. There's your undies. And that's kind of the fast food section where you can get a quick lunch, quick bite to eat. Loofah sponge, anybody? Cauliflower. Oh, banana. Had to run to catch this guy. He was quick. And I talked about security. I don't know if you can really see it. I had to hesitated to take the picture too much, but you see a little thing sticking out of his back pocket. That's the butt of a gun. This guy traveled with us every time when we were in Cairo and north up into Alexandria. He was always sitting in front of the bus. He had his gun with him. He was the first guy off the bus. And we'd also have, especially in Alexandria, we had police escorts on a number of cases where we would have a police car in front of us. And this fellow here was stopping traffic so the bus could get, he came out of his car because no one was letting us in. So I don't know if you can, he's really got it quite well hidden on the side of him, but I don't know if you can see the gun in front of him. He had his rifle with him. So people tended to stop when they saw him and let the traffic go. But that's what happened. And when we got up to the graveyard at the Bala Alamin, we had a military escort also. So they were quite worried. They're still worried about the tourists and making sure that we were safe. And we did feel actually very safe. A bit of the families that you see in Egypt. These ones had a bigger bite and less people. We ended up in this amphitheater, and it was a marvelous spot to be. And again, I talked about how friendly the people were, and there was a lot of kids there that day, and they just swamped to you. They would stand back from the guys. Even the young guys would be hesitant to come to the guys, but they would certainly go to the ladies and talk to the ladies. And we had a couple of younger ladies with us who were very good-looking young ladies, and even the boys would go to them. And it was really interesting to see the interaction. But no one would come. The guys they'd be a little shy to come to us, but they were very friendly. Some of the little families we